At 24, I was finally starting to feel like I was on the right track. Phoenix summers were brutal, but my small one-bedroom apartment, with its overworked air conditioner, had become my haven. My internship left me exhausted every day, but I was proud of how far I'd come. College was behind me, along with the endless late-night study sessions and panic-fueled cramming. My diploma hung proudly on the wall, a reminder of everything I'd pushed through to reach this point. My phone buzzed on the desk, interrupting my thoughts. It was an email, but I was too drained to check it immediately. I assumed it was just another generic message from the bank, a routine reminder about my student loan payments. Later, as I sat down with a reheated slice of pizza, I finally opened the email. What I saw made my world tilt. Dear Mr. Taylor, your outstanding loan balance is $135,000. Your next payment is due. The words blurred after that. My chest tightened and I stared at the screen, fixated on the number. It didn't make sense. I knew my college tuition had been $50,000 and my partial scholarship had reduced that by $20,000. I had worked part-time to cover the rest. No matter how I calculated it, the numbers didn't add up. I refreshed the email, hoping it was some sort of error. But the figure remained, looming like a threat. Panic surged as I logged into my loan account. There it was, clear as day. $135,000. My heart pounded as I tried to make sense of it. Could this be a mistake? A glitch? A typo? Desperate for answers, I dialed my mom. She was the one person who always seemed to have an explanation. "Hi, sweetie," she answered cheerfully, the sound of her favorite cooking show playing faintly in the background. "Mom, I just got an email from the bank," I said, doing my best to keep my voice steady. "It says I owe $135,000 in student loans. That can't be right." There was a pause. Not a concerned pause, but the kind that made my stomach drop. She said, her tone almost dismissive. "That doesn't sound right. Are you sure it's not a mistake?" "I checked the account," I said firmly. "It's real. Mom, what's going on? Did you or Dad do something with my loans?" "Oh, honey," she replied, her voice light. "Don't stress. It's probably just a mix-up. We'll sort it out." Her casual reassurance only deepened my suspicion. My parents weren't usually careless with money, but they had a habit of withholding details. "Mom, I need you to be honest with me," I pressed. "Did you and Dad take out more money than I needed for school? Like the full amount of the loans?" Another pause, longer and heavier this time. I could almost hear the wheels turning in her head. "Well," she said finally, her voice quieter, "we might have taken out the full amount, just to make sure you had enough. You know, in case your scholarship didn't cover everything." "What?" My voice rose before I could stop it. "Mom, my scholarship covered most of my tuition, and I worked to cover the rest. Why would you take out more than I needed?" Her hesitation spoke volumes, but her next words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Well, your brother needed some help too." "Ryan," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "What does Ryan have to do with my student loans?" "Sweetie," she began, her tone shifting to a patronizing one I'd always hated. "Ryan's been struggling with his music career. He needed a little financial support, and we thought it was only fair to help him out too." My head spun. Ryan, my 28-year-old brother, had dropped out of college years ago to pursue his dream of becoming a musician. I had always supported him, cheering him on even when he moved back home after another failed tour. "But this? You're telling me," I said, my voice shaking, "that you took out extra money in my name and gave it to Ryan?" "It's not as bad as it sounds," she said quickly. "We were just trying to give both of you the best chance to succeed. We didn't think it would be a big deal." "Not a big deal?" My voice cracked. "It's $135,000, Mom. I'm 24. I just started working. How am I supposed to pay this off?" "We'll figure it out," she said, brushing me off. "Don't stress yourself over it. We'll talk more later." But I couldn't wait. The weight of her admission was too much to bear. Without saying goodbye, I hung up and slammed my phone down. My hands trembled, and I could feel the tide of anger and disbelief rising. My parents had taken out $135,000 in loans under my name without my consent. For what? So my brother could waste it on studio time and road trips? Meanwhile, I had been scraping by, working late shifts just to make ends meet. I stared at the email again, the number glaring back at me like a prison sentence. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a betrayal. My voice was cold as I responded, "Because I've been too busy funding my own life instead of freeloading off Mom and Dad." Ryan's jaw clenched, but he stayed silent. I turned back to my parents. "I want a full breakdown of how much of this loan went to Ryan and why it wasn't taken out in his name. He's 28, for crying out loud. He's old enough to handle his own financial issues." My mom sniffled, her voice barely audible. "He didn't have the credit or grades to qualify for a loan. We didn't have any other choice." A bitter laugh escaped me. "So what? You decided, oh, let's just dump it on Alex. He'll manage somehow." "That's not what we thought," my dad said defensively. "Then what did you think?" I demanded, my voice rising again. "That I'd just accept it without question? That I wouldn't notice?" The room grew uncomfortably quiet. My mom stared at the floor. My dad looked at me like I was the problem, and Ryan folded his arms, refusing to engage. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice steady despite the fury simmering beneath the surface. "I'm not paying back a single cent of the $70,000 you gave to Ryan. Either you figure out how to fix this, or I'll take legal action. I don't care what it does to this family. I'm done being your scapegoat." Without waiting for a response, I grabbed my keys and stormed out, slamming the door behind me. As I drove away, my hands shook on the steering wheel. Part of me felt guilty for how harsh I had been, but another part knew I had no choice. This wasn't just about money. It was about trust, respect, and the years of resentment I had buried. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to let them trample all over me. I was standing up for myself, no matter the cost. The drive back to my apartment felt endless. My anger burned steadily, refusing to fade. The confrontation replayed in my mind on an endless loop. My dad's dismissive attitude, my mom's tears, and Ryan's apathy. It churned in my chest like a storm I couldn't escape. When I got home, I collapsed onto the couch, my thoughts racing. Beneath the anger was a deep sense of betrayal. They were my family. They were supposed to protect me, not set me up to fail. That night, I stayed awake researching everything I could about loans, legal rights, and my options. I didn't know where to begin, so I typed student loan fraud by parents into Google. The search results were both horrifying and oddly reassuring. I wasn't alone. Forum after forum was filled with stories like mine. It didn't make me feel any better, but at least I wasn't the first person to be betrayed by the people who were supposed to care about them. By the time the sun rose, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to let this slide. My parents might think they could guilt me into silence, but they didn't understand just how determined I could be. The next morning, I called a lawyer. His name was Daniel Shaw, a no-nonsense professional with a gravelly voice and a strong record in messy family disputes. I laid out everything: the inflated loan balance, the money funneled to Ryan without my consent, and the forged documents. "Do you have any documentation?" he asked after I finished explaining. "I think so," I replied, racking my brain. "Emails, loan statements, maybe some bank records. I'll have to dig them up." "Good," Daniel said. "Bring me everything you've got. This isn't an uncommon situation, but it's complicated. You'll need solid evidence if you want to move forward." When I hung up, I felt both relieved and terrified. This was no longer just a family dispute, it was now a legal battle. And I was preparing to face off against my own parents. The next few days blurred into a haze of paperwork and sleepless nights. I sifted through every document, email, and record I could find. The more I uncovered, the worse it got. The loan paperwork bore my signature in places I didn't remember signing, and bank statements revealed transfers I hadn't authorized. The worst part was realizing how deliberate it all was. My parents had planned this, or at least gone along with it, knowing exactly what they were doing. And Ryan? He had taken the money and spent it without hesitation. I tried not to dwell on the betrayal. It didn't matter how much it hurt. I had to focus on protecting myself. When I finally had everything gathered, I called my parents to let them know where things stood. "Mom, Dad," I said firmly over the phone, "we need to talk again. This time, I want you to come to my apartment." My mom hesitated. "Alex, do we really need to drag this out? I'm sure we can work something out." "We're past that," I said, cutting her off. "I've consulted a lawyer. I'm giving you one last chance to explain yourselves and come up with a plan to fix this before I take legal action." The silence on the other end was deafening. "Fine," my dad said coldly. "We'll be there tonight." They arrived just after dinner, walking into my apartment like they were stepping into hostile territory. My mom clutched her purse tightly, her nerves evident, while my dad's expression was grim. "Sit," I said, motioning toward the small dining table. I didn't waste time with small talk. "I've reviewed the loan documents," I began. "I have proof you took out more than I needed, evidence that the extra money went to Ryan, and proof that you forged my signature on some of the paperwork." My mom's face paled. "Alex, we didn't forge anything. You signed those papers." "I signed them when I was 18, I shot back, my voice rising. "You told me it was for my tuition. You never said you were using them to borrow extra for Ryan." My dad leaned forward, his tone sharp. "We didn't forge anything, and we never intended for this to happen. You're blowing this out of proportion." "Out of proportion?" I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. "You've saddled me with $135,000 in debt. This isn't a molehill. It's my entire future." My mom tried to interject, her voice trembling. "Alex, we thought we were doing what was best for the family. Ryan needed help and we didn't have any other options." "You had options," I said, glaring at them. "You could have taken out a loan in his name. You could have talked to me. But instead, you gambled with my future without even asking me." "We didn't think it would come to this," my mom said, tears streaming down her face. "Well, it has," I said, pacing the room. "And now, I'm the one left dealing with it." The room fell silent. My dad rubbed his temples, and my mom sobbed quietly into her hands. "I'm not paying for Ryan's mistakes," I said firmly, breaking the silence. "You have 3 weeks to figure out how to repay the $70,000 you took. If you don't, I'll take legal action." My dad's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. "You'd take us to court? Your own parents?" "I don't want to," I said. "But you've left me no choice. This isn't just about the money, it's about trust. And right now, I don't trust you to do the right thing unless I force you to." My mom reached out, her voice pleading. "Alex, please! We're your parents! We never meant to hurt you!" "You already have," I said, my voice breaking. "And now it's your responsibility to fix it." I walked to the door and opened it, signaling the conversation was over. My parents exchanged a look, then left without another word. As the door clicked shut behind them, I leaned against it, my legs shaking. Relief and sadness flooded me. Relief that I had stood up for myself. Sadness because I knew deep down that things would never be the same. In the days that followed, I felt like I was wading through quicksand. Every step forward required twice the effort it should have. I was emotionally and physically drained, but there was no room to slow down. If my parents thought, I wasn't seriously considering taking the case to court, but my parents were about to get a harsh wake-up call. My evenings were spent alongside my lawyer, Daniel Shaw, going through every piece of documentation, email, and bank record I could dig up. Each new item of evidence felt like a brick in a wall I was constructing, strong and unshakable. It was the only thing that gave me a sense of control in a situation where everything else felt like it was spiraling beyond my grasp. 3 weeks came and went without a single word from my parents. No phone calls, no text messages, not even a half-hearted apology. It was as if they were waiting for me to back down first. When the deadline I had set passed, I scheduled another meeting with Daniel. We sat across from one another in his small, cluttered downtown office, the hum of the old air conditioner filling the silence. I handed him a folder containing everything I had gathered. "This looks solid," he said, flipping through the papers. "We've got a strong case here. Are you absolutely sure you want to proceed? Once we file, there's no turning back." I paused for only a moment. This wasn't a choice I had made lightly. "They've left me no other option," I replied. "If I don't push forward, I'll be stuck with this debt for the rest of my life. They've made it clear they won't take responsibility unless I force them to." Daniel nodded, leaning back in his chair. "Fair enough. Let's get started." The following day, I officially filed the lawsuit. The amount of paperwork involved felt overwhelming, but with Daniel's guidance, we managed to navigate it all. Once the process was complete, I felt an odd mixture of emotions: relief, anger, and sadness all tangled together. It didn't feel real. I had thought that filing the lawsuit would be the most difficult part, but I was wrong. The hardest part came afterward, when word began to spread among the family. It didn't take long for the calls and messages to start flooding in. My mom must have told everyone because, suddenly, I became the Taylor family's public enemy #1. "You're suing your own parents?" my Aunt Linda said over the phone, her tone dripping with disapproval. "Family should always come first, Alex. This is just plain wrong." "Where was that energy when they dropped 6 figures of debt on me?" I shot back. She didn't have a response to that and muttered something about me being selfish before hanging up. The calls kept coming, many from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Most sided with my parents, accusing me of tearing the family apart. A few cousins reached out to say they understood my position, but even they sounded hesitant, as if they didn't want to get too involved. It was exhausting. For the first time, I realized how isolating it was to stand up for myself. This wasn't just a fight with my parents anymore. It was a battle against an entire network of people who thought I should back down for the sake of family peace. The only ones truly in my corner were my best friend, Sarah, and my girlfriend, Rachel. They let me vent, kept me focused, and reminded me why I had to keep going whenever guilt started to creep in. "You're doing the right thing," Rachel said one night as we sat on the couch with the TV playing in the background. "Just because they're your family doesn't give them the right to treat you this way. You deserve better." I wanted to believe her. Some days I did. On others, I wasn't so sure. A week after filing, my dad finally called. Seeing his name flash on my phone screen made my stomach twist, but I answered anyway. "Alex," he began, his voice tight. "We need to talk." "We're talking now," I replied. "Not like this," he snapped. "Face to face. Tomorrow. Your mom and I will come to your place." I agreed, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe a part of me still hoped they'd see reason, that this could be resolved without dragging it through the courts. The next evening, they arrived. My mom's face was puffy, her eyes red as though she had been crying for days. My dad looked livid, his jaw clenched and his fists tight at his sides. They sat across from me at the dining table, the tension in the room so thick it was suffocating. "You filed a lawsuit against us?" my dad began, his voice low but laced with fury. "I gave you 3 weeks to make this right," I said, keeping my tone even. You didn't even try. We didn't think you'd actually go through with it, my mom said, her voice cracking as she started to cry. Well, you thought wrong, I replied. My dad leaned forward, his glare sharp enough to cut through steel. Do you have any idea what this is doing to your mother? To this family? You're going to destroy everything over a little money. A little money? I echoed, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. This isn't pocket change, Dad. It's $135,000. That's more than most people earn in a year, and I didn't even spend it. My mom reached across the table, her voice trembling. Alex, please. We'll figure something out. Just drop the lawsuit. Don't do this to us. I pulled back, shaking my head. I already did. You're the ones who did this. You put me in this position, and now you're trying to make me the bad guy for standing up for myself. We never wanted it to go this far, my dad said, his tone softening for the first time. We were just trying to help Ryan. And what about helping me? I asked, my voice breaking. I worked so hard to get through college and set myself up for the future. Did that mean nothing to you? My mom sobbed harder, but I didn't let it sway me. Here's the deal, I said firmly. I'm willing to settle. If you can repay the $70,000 you took for Ryan and cover the legal fees, I'll drop the lawsuit. If not, we go to court. We don't have that kind of money, my dad said. Then figure it out, I replied, because I'm not backing down. The room fell silent again. My mom wept quietly, and my dad stared at me like he didn't recognize me anymore. We'll talk about it, he said finally, standing up. As they walked out, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. I hated that it had come to this, but I knew I had no other choice. This wasn't just about the money. It was about something much bigger. Standing up for myself wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about holding my ground, no matter the consequences. 2 weeks passed after my parents stormed out of my apartment, and I heard absolutely nothing. There were no calls, no texts, no attempts to negotiate. The silence was overwhelming, and I couldn't tell if it signaled their stubbornness or a quiet plea for time. During those 2 weeks, I poured all my energy into preparing for court, as if my future depended on it. Daniel assured me that our case was solid. He was confident that the loan documents, bank statements, and records of unauthorized transfers were enough to support my claims. Still, his confidence didn't erase the constant knot in my stomach. On the last day of the 2-week deadline, my phone finally buzzed. It was a text from my dad. We'll meet to discuss a settlement tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. at Daniel's office. I reread the message several times, my emotions wavering between relief and caution. This wasn't over yet, but at least they were willing to confront the situation. The next morning, we sat across from each other in the conference room at Daniel's office. My mom looked exhausted, her hands clutching a tissue she had already shredded from nervous fidgeting. My dad wore the same stern, defensive expression he always adopted when he felt backed into a corner. Daniel began the meeting with his characteristic directness. "Mr. and Mrs. Taylor," he said, his tone firm, "Alex has given you multiple opportunities to resolve this matter peacefully. Are you prepared to settle today?" My dad glared at Daniel, then at me. "We don't have $70,000 just lying around," he said gruffly. "But we've managed to pull some money together." I kept my expression neutral, though my heart was pounding. "How much?" I asked. "We can start with $10,000, my mom said softly, her voice strained. "We'll pay the rest in installments, monthly payments." Daniel leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "And how long are you proposing it will take to pay off the remaining $60,000? My dad shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable. "We were thinking 10 years. A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. 10 years? Are you serious? I'll still be paying off my own loans by then. This isn't a favor you're doing for me. It's your responsibility." "Alex, please," my mom said, her voice breaking. "This is the best we can do. We don't have any other options. Daniel raised a hand, signaling me to pause. Let's clarify what's at stake, he said. If Alex takes this to court, the amount owed will likely increase. Punitive damages, interest, and legal fees could push the total far beyond the $70,000 we're discussing. Is that a risk you're prepared to take? The room fell into an uneasy silence. I watched as my dad clenched his jaw and glanced at my mom, who nodded tearfully. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. We'll pay it off in 3 years. Monthly payments, starting with the $10,000 we already have. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. I turned to Daniel, who nodded in approval. We'll draft the agreement, Daniel said. If even one payment is missed, we'll move forward with the lawsuit. My parents reluctantly agreed, though my dad looked like he was barely containing his frustration. My mom attempted to meet my eyes as we left, but I couldn't bring myself to look at her. The sense of relief I felt after reaching the settlement was immediate, but it came with an emptiness. I had won the battle, but it didn't feel like a victory. My relationship with my parents was shattered, and Ryan hadn't even bothered to show up. The first payment arrived a week later. I used it to pay off part of my student loans, taking a small but meaningful step toward reducing the mountain of debt that still loomed over me. It felt good to regain even a little control over my finances, yet, despite the agreement, I couldn't shake the constant anxiety that came with waiting for my parents' payments each month. I half expected them to miss one, forcing me to reopen the legal battle. So far, they had kept their word, but the damage to our relationship was irreparable. Ryan reached out only once, sending a short text. Sorry things got so bad. Hope we can talk someday. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to face him, not after everything his actions had cost me. Life moved forward in small, careful steps. My internship turned into a full-time job, and I started saving for a fresh start. I dreamed of leaving Phoenix and finding a new city where I could build a life free from the weight of my family's betrayal. One day, as I packed up my apartment to prepare for a move to Denver, I came across an old family photo. It was from my high school graduation. The 4 of us were smiling in the Arizona sun. My mom had her arm around me, my dad looked proud, and Ryan was making a goofy face. I stared at the picture for a long time, trying to reconcile the happy family in the image with the people I now knew them to be. They weren't villains, not entirely. They were flawed, selfish, and deeply misguided. But they were still my family. I set the photo aside, uncertain whether I'd keep it or leave it behind. Some wounds take more than time to heal, and I wasn't ready to forgive them. Not yet. As I closed the box and taped it shut, I felt an odd sense of closure. My life was mine again, no longer weighed down by their choices. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, I was okay with that. Sometimes, doing the right thing doesn't feel like a triumph. It feels like loss, like breaking something that can never be repaired. But it's necessary. As painful as this ordeal had been, it had taught me something valuable. I was stronger than I had ever imagined, and I deserved better than what I had been given. The path ahead was mine to choose, and I was ready to take the first step.